Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to our Q&A, our live Q&A on Progressive MS, hosted by the MS Society. This is the first time that we've done this at the MS Society, and we're really excited to be hosting this Q&A. But because it's the first time, if we do have a couple of technical problems along the way, please be patient with us. So first of all, I'm Sorrel. I'm the Research Communications Manager here at the MS Society, and I'm going to be your host for today's Hangout on Air. So what's coming up? We're going to be talking about progressive MS research, and particularly a new global research collaboration that's called the Progressive MS Alliance, and we want you guys to know more about it. So the best part about today is that you can get involved while you're watching. We want you to send us your questions about any of the things that we're talking about, but especially about the Progressive MS Alliance. So you can do that by tweeting your questions to us using the hashtag #BrighterFuture. Or if you're watching this on YouTube or Google+, you can just write your comments as a question below the video. So we've had loads of really good questions sent in already, and I'm going to be reading some of those out as we go along. So if you've sent in your question already, stay tuned and we'll try and get to it. If we've got time, we're going to read as many as we can. But first of all, if you're watching at home, you can see all these funny other people at the bottom of the screen that are joining us today. So I'm going to introduce you to everyone that we've got participating. And the Progressive MS Alliance is a really global, really exciting initiative that's happening all around the world. And to reflect that, we've got people from all over the world joining us today. But first of all, not all over the world, right next to me, I'm joined by Dr. Emma Gray.
Hi everyone, I'm Emma Gray. I'm Head of Biomedical Research here at the MS Society. We're in sunny Cricklewood. I'm really excited to be hanging out with everyone today and especially answering some extra difficult questions.
Lovely. So as well as Emma right next to me, we're joined by a panel of experts from around the world that are going to be answering your questions in the Q&A today. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Doug Landsman. Hi Doug.
Hi there. Glad to be here, and I look forward to participating in today's discussion.
Thanks very much, Doug. So also joining us, so I'd like to just say we're really grateful to Doug for joining us today because he's based in New York, and it's currently, I think, 7 in the morning there, something very early.
It's 7:30 right now, but I've been up for a while, so hopefully I'll be able to speak coherently. And I forgot to say, so I'm the Senior Director of International Research Programs at the National MS Society in the United States.
Thank you very much, Doug. So next I'd like to go to Don Mahad and also Dr. Graham Campbell, his colleague.
Hi Sorrel. My name is Don Mahad. Me and Graham, we work in Edinburgh. It's a pleasure to join you all and look forward to answering some of your questions.
Hey, it's great to be here. So my name is Graham Campbell. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in Don Mahad's lab. So I've spent about 3 years here in Edinburgh. Yeah, it's very excited to do this hangout today.
Thanks very much to you both. We also have another researcher joining us, which is Professor Sandra Amor. Sandra?
Hello everybody, I'm Sandra Amor. I'm actually based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I actually worked in England for quite a long time until about 10 years ago when I moved to the Netherlands to continue my research.
Excellent, thank you Sandra. So we'll be hearing from Don and Sandra as well about their projects that have been funded by the Alliance today. But another really important part of this Q&A is the questions. And we have a panel of 3 people affected by MS to really quiz our experts, and they're with us today on the Hangout as well. So first of all, we've got Alison Ridley. Oh, Alison, I think we've lost your microphone. Can you just check you're not on mute? No, I think we've lost Alison. We'll try and come back to you, Alison, if you can just check that your microphone isn't muted. But in the meanwhile, let me introduce you to Rani Kaur.
Hi, I'm Rani. I'm an MSer of 14 years and a support officer for Asian MS, which is a national support group run by the MS Society UK.
Excellent, thank you very much, Rani. And we also have joining us Tim Warner. Hi, Tim.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Tim Warner. I'm from southern England, and I've been diagnosed with primary progressive MS for about 14 years too.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. So let's just try one more time, see if we can get to speak to you, Alison. Do you want to try your microphone again? Oh, I think we're having trouble with Alison. It sounds like she's kind of doing a bit of a mime at the moment. So we'll see if Alison, if you manage to get that working during the Hangout. Otherwise, we'll see what we can do. You can have a lovely time just watching us all talking. Okay, so the main reason we're here today is to raise awareness of progressive MS research and all the exciting things that are going on into the research all around the world. But we're also here to promote our Christmas fundraising appeal, which is called Brighter Future. So it's all about the Progressive MS Alliance and the work that they're doing. But crucially, at the MS Society, we want to continue to support progressive MS research. We want to be able to continue to fund the Progressive MS Alliance in the future. But we can't do that without your help. So we're asking today for people to donate to our Brighter Future campaign. So they can do that in two ways. First of all, you can visit our website to make a donation, which is mssociety.org.uk/future. And then the other way you can donate is by texting the word future to 70800, and that will give a donation of £5 to the appeal. Okay, so, I don't know, shall we try it with Alison one more time?
Hello, everybody.
Oh, Alison, excellent. Hi.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Yes, hello, nice to be here. I was diagnosed 10 years ago with relapsing remitting. I had my children at that time were 5 and 11, and they are now, you know, one's galloping towards being 17 and the other one is 21. We live in East Anglia and it's been a whole learning curve. I'm currently doing my PhD as well. I'm very pleased to be here today.
Excellent, Alison. Thank you so much. I'm so glad we managed to get you in as well. So we've got everybody on board. That's perfect.
The full lineup.
Full lineup. Okay, so let's get going. I think first of all we just want to set the scene about what we're talking about today. So first of all, Emma, if you could just give us a bit of an introduction about really what is progressive MS.
Okay, so actually that's a really, really good question. And when we talk about progressive MS, we're really referring to both primary progressive MS and secondary progressive MS. So it's worth bearing in mind that when we say progressive MS, we're meaning both. And really, progressive forms of MS is when people accumulate permanent disability without having attacks or relapses. So normally, about 85% of people are diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS. That means that they'll have periods of attacks or relapses that will recover either fully or partially. And when somebody is secondary progressive MS, what then happens is that the disability accumulates aside from those relapses, so it happens alongside it. And when we're talking about primary progressive MS, those are people, probably about 10 to 15% of people with MS at diagnosis, and they have progressive MS from the start, so they accumulate disability from the start without having those relapses. And I'm going to ask Don, who's a neurologist, to ask if that was an accurate description, if there's anything he wanted to add to that.
Marks out of 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, Emma. I think you get 10 out of 10 for that. I mean, it is actually a very important question, and I think we could do better actually to define progressive MS. And you know, as part of the Progressive MS Alliance in the future, I think it's something that we can do, because what's becoming apparent is kind of MS description is what we see in the clinic when we see patients. But then if you look at the scans and if you look at some of the biology, some of the blood tests, the inflammation markers, that, you know, there's a heterogeneity. In other words, not everybody who gets worse irreversibly due to MS has the same kind of underlying problem. And trying to kind of you know, split the group to try and better understand, so we could target treatment better to the individual. It's going to be really crucial to understand the underlying pathology and what's causing that. So work done from Canada and Montreal recently, you know, identified a type of protein in the spinal fluid which could kind of differentiate patients who you know, get worse quickly and have certain types of changes on the MRI. So that's an example. So I think, you know, we have a, you know, very practical, very useful set of criteria to diagnose progressive MS, but this probably will have to be refined to kind of incorporate the variability and also to give us the ability to individualize treatment in the future.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much, Don. So we've had a few questions in already on Twitter and via email, and I think a few of these are really kind of asking the same question, really. So first of all, Chrissy52 on Twitter, Christelle by email, and Amit, and also Christopher Paul Gill on Facebook are all asking very similar questions. That's really, are there any treatments available already at the moment for progressive MS? Emma?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question that we get asked a lot, and I'm sure that is a question that Don gets asked a lot. There are 11 licensed disease-modifying treatments for people with relapsing remitting MS, and the relapsing remitting MS treatment field has come on leaps and bounds in the last 20 years, and it's often very frustrating for people with progressive MS to not have access to the same range of treatments. But I mean, it's also worth saying that there are a lot of symptom management treatments and therapies out there, specifically licensed for MS. There's Botox for bladder, Sativex for spasticity, and Vampiro for walking speed. And even though sometimes it's often hard to access these treatments, there are options out there. And if anybody has particular symptoms that are problematic, it is worth speaking to a healthcare professional, because there might be, pain medications, things out there that people can do. I don't know, Don, if you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, sure, Emma. I guess again, referring back to the previous point about the variability within progressive MS. I mean, if you got progressive MS and then you either had relapses on top of it, or your scan shows kind of active MS. By that, what I mean is, when you have this dye called gadolinium, and if the dye leaks into the brain, indicating breakdown in the blood-brain barrier, if these situations are present and you have progressive MS, some of the existing disease-modifying therapy can be helpful. So if you've got progressive MS and you think you're getting worse, perhaps faster than you think it's happened in the past, it's worth checking up with the neurologist just to see, could this be superimposed relapses, or could there be, a reactivation of the MS, and maybe they might consider doing a scan. So if you kind of consider that scenario, and then you look at the rest of it, actually, Emma was quite right, and we really don't have effective and approved therapy for secondary progressive or primary progressive MS. There's a lot of symptomatic therapy, and there's been clinical trials, and I believe the outcome will be announced in a few weeks' time. So it's an exciting area where there's been outcome of clinical trials that's going to be available pretty soon, but also the Progressive MS Alliance's goal about trying to understand the underlying mechanisms and to come up with drugs, both experimentally and for patients, is really timely.
Okay, thanks very much, Don.
Sorry, can I add?
Yeah, please do.
And I think people often ask us, well, if I've got, Don said that if people have progressive MS and they're still experiencing relapses, then it's possible to potentially take a disease-modifying drug. And people often ask why people with progressive MS aren't automatically given disease-modifying drugs. And I think generally the understanding is that the relapses are caused by the immune system, and when people progress, it's no longer the immune system having that effect, so that potentially the disease-modifying drugs aren't going to work. However, there is a lot of research going on to understand why people progress, and there might still be a role for the immune system, maybe in a different way than we thought. And as Don mentioned, there are clinical trials of disease-modifying drugs in progressive MS going on. So there's a clinical trial in primary progressive MS of Gilenya or fingolimod that hopefully will have the results soon. And they're also testing Tysabri, natalizumab in secondary progressive MS. So it's ongoing, and we'll be updating people as soon as we hear any results from those trials.
Okay, great. I actually think that's already answered one of the other questions that we've had in. This is from Carol Marie Humphreys on the MS Society Scotland Facebook, and she was asking why it is that people with secondary progressive MS can't have disease-modifying drugs. But I think that's sort of covered that topic really well. So we'll move on. We've had a couple of questions in about the prevalence of MS. So first of all, Alan Marks is asking what percentage of people have primary progressive MS, and I guess on the other side, what percentage have secondary? Do we know those numbers, Emma?
So I think we roughly understand that when people are diagnosed, about 85% 80 to 85% of people have relapsing remitting MS. 10 to 15% have primary progressive MS. And in terms of people developing from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive, I think most people will develop that, but it can be a long period of time. It could be 20 years, something like that. I mean, it's kind of hard to do averages for MS because it's, it's so variable.
Yeah. So kind of along that vein, someone is also asking about, this is AJ Faridi, this is a question that's come in on Facebook, which says all research seems to be geared towards finding medicines to prevent relapses, but we know almost nothing about primary progressive MS or what causes patients to go from relapsing remitting to secondary progressive MS. So why isn't there as much research into this? Do you think you can answer that one, Emma?
I mean, I think that's a really, really good question, and the research, the MS research community for a long time was focused on relapsing remitting MS, and essentially altering the immune system, I guess, is biologically more simple than tackling what happens in progression and nerve cell death and being able to fix that. And it's, I mean, to say that it's easier to treat relapsing remitting MS is a bit of a cop-out, but that's, I think, essentially been the case, and we haven't had the tools to be able to study it in the way we can. But I think genuinely there's a bit of a turning point at the moment, and the whole international research community is now focused on progressive MS. Research tools, MRI, things like that, are improving biomarkers, looking at progression, and Don's talked about how we're trying to understand more about the pathology of progressive MS, what happens inside the cells as someone progressive, and looking in really great detail. So I think that things really have changed, and the Progressive MS Alliance is an absolute example of that.
Great. And that's why we're here today, of course, to talk about progressive MS. So I just wanted to move on to a couple of questions that we might kind of use your expertise again, Don. But someone is asking, this is Vivian Kalazen's asking on Google+, who says that she was diagnosed with MS at the end of 2007, but up until today, she doesn't know whether or not she has progressive MS. So she's asking, how is MS defined as progressive or not?
Yeah, so at present, it's very much based on what happens to you, your experiences, or what your family and friends reports, and what the neurologists find when they talk to you and examine you. And essentially, over a period of 6 months, if your neurologist or you could show that your neurological function has been gradually declining, and this is not being related to a relapse, then that's sufficient, and you have clinically definite multiple sclerosis, then this is sufficient to say it's progressing.
Okay. All right, thanks very much, Don. Now, I think we've also got a question from Rani on our panel about progressive MS. Rani, did you have a question to ask?
Yes, I did. Sorry, just find it. Okay. Do we know how many people in the world actually have MS, and how many have progressive MS?
Ooh. I think maybe I'll see if we can give that one to you.
Or why don't we see if Doug wants to answer that one, because that's something that Progressive MS Alliance has.
Right, so that gets to the question of prevalence, and there's no worldwide database on MS right now, but it's estimated that 2.3 million people living worldwide have are living with multiple sclerosis, and perhaps 1 million or a little over half of the 2.3 are living with a progressive form of MS. There are studies underway to better understand the prevalence of MS and progressive MS, but right now those are our best numbers.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks very much, Doug. Does that answer your question, Rani?
It does, and I think it's one of those things where it's going to be a work in progress, isn't it? It's always going to change as new people who have been diagnosed with progressive MS. How will that get logged? Will the Alliance, through its own individual membership of its organisations, will they feed that in to the Alliance internationally for that database to begin to be collated? Because that's also an issue, isn't it? We have to have a pool of information on which to be able to draw upon, and if we don't have that, then we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment. So we need to begin to develop that. I suppose the we actually have here in the UK, we do something of a similar nature about MS research already, don't we? Which is a project that we're funded by the MS Society, and I've completely forgotten.
Are you referring to the MS Register?
Yes.
So the MS Register is not specifically looking to measure prevalence, but it's a really, really important study to try and understand the impact that MS has on people across the UK and link their experiences with clinical data as well. So it's a really important project, and if anybody isn't joined to the MS Register, we urge you to sign up, and there's be information on our website about how to do that.
Excellent.
Quick plug.
Okay, cool. So I think, seeing as we're already talking about the Alliance, we can move on to really kind of get to grips with what the Alliance is about and what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to come to Doug, who's from the National MS Society in the US. So Doug, could you just kind of set the scene for us? What exactly is the Progressive MS Alliance? What's it all about?
Yeah, right. So the Alliance is a collaboration of MS organizations and other stakeholders from around the world that have come together to fund research specifically on progressive MS. It is governed by an executive committee, and its managing members report on activities to their respective boards and to the MSIF.
Okay, and Doug, who's in the Alliance? Who are the members?
Yeah, excellent question. So right now, the managing members include the Italian MS Society, MS Research Australia, MSIF, the MS Society UK, MS Society of Canada, and the National Multiple Sclerosis Society in the United States. We have additional contributing members, and they include Germany, Spain, Belgium, Denmark, and the Netherlands, and it's a growing list, so it's very exciting.
Wow, that sounds great, Doug. And so, what's the, for people out there living with MS, what's the Alliance really hoping to achieve? What's its ultimate goal? What's it trying to do in the world?
Right. So our understanding of the pathophysiology, or what's underlying the disease of progressive MS, has really lagged from our understanding of regular MS. And the goal of the Progressive MS Alliance is to better understand progressive MS. So there's a sense of urgency around the lack of treatments for progressive MS, and this is really what drove the creation of the Progressive MS Alliance. So its mission is to expedite the development of therapies for effective disease modification and symptom management in progressive MS. And we're going to do that by connecting researchers across disciplines from around the world.
Wow, that sounds really, really exciting, Doug. Thank you very much. I actually think we've got a question from Alison on our panel about the Alliance. Alison, can I hand over to you?
Okay, thank you. You've already sort of more or less told us what the goal of the collaboration is, and to a certain extent how the Alliance is organised. You've got so many members across the world. What kind of actual research projects have been funded so far?
Oh, excellent question. So the Alliance put out a call for applications earlier this year and recently funded this first round of applications. We funded 22 research projects from 9 countries from around the world. And those research projects really sort of span the gamut of that on progressive MS research. And I guess broadly, I could say that they were looking at things such as clinical trials and outcome measures, biomarkers for progression of MS, gene studies, rehabilitation trials, and other general studies looking at the underlying pathology of progressive MS. So we're trying to cast, at least in the first round of applications, we were casting a wide net, and these were pilot studies really trying to better understand progressive MS.
Have you had anything that's actually come from it that's sort of really exciting that can be further developed, do you think, in the near future?
So to be clear, the funding for these projects just started within the past couple of months. These are brand new projects. This is the first round of funding ever from the Progressive MS Alliance, and the data is just now starting to get collected. So I can't report out on these particular projects. I think they're very exciting, but I can't report on any data right now.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Alison, we're going to be hearing from two of the researchers funded by the Alliance, so we can check in on their projects in just a few minutes.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to didn't want to steal their thunder, and so Dr. Amor and Dr. Mahat are definitely going to be able to talk about their projects.
Thank you very much, Doug. I actually think that Rani also has a question about the Alliance.
I do. It follows on from the conversation that we've just had. Is the Alliance looking at natural alternative ways to improve health outcomes in the research, or will you solely be looking at allopathic avenues?
That's an excellent question. In the first round of projects that I was just describing, we accepted applications from investigators from around the world and had peer review panels, experts review the projects to see what was the most promising. They were unbiased reviews, and I don't think, I'm not sure that I could say that there's a holistic project being funded right now, but it's not, again, it's not because there was a bias, it's because other projects ranked higher at the end of the day.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. We've had a question in via email for you, Doug, about the Alliance. Oh, I think just before I give it, I just want to give a reminder that if you do want to send us questions while we're live, you can do that by tweeting using the hashtag #BrighterFuture, or you can just comment if you're watching on YouTube or Google+. If you comment below the video, we can read your questions out live. We've had a few in already, so that's really cool. But we've had this question in from Alistair Leake via email, who's saying he's really, really optimistic concerning what might be happening in research today, especially the work in progressive MS. But he's curious whether is the research focused on curing or controlling MS, and how are the resources going to be allocated?
Wow, excellent question. Both types of research are being funded. And again, so I think what did he call it? Curing versus
Controlling.
Controlling.
And yeah, so both types of research are being funded. Again, we use a peer review process to select the best research, and so there's no quota right now on how to allocate those funds, but the Progressive MS Alliance has committed at least 22 million euro over the next 5 years to research in progressive MS. And we just started with this first round of applications, and now we just put out a second call for applications and to take the research to the next level. And so this next round of awards are going to be for collaborative networks, where we're really encouraging investigators to work together on solving the problems of progressive MS. And the applications haven't come in yet. They're going to be filing in over the next month or so, so I can't tell you what they're going to be, but we're really looking forward to having investigators from around the world working together to solve these problems.
Okay, thanks very much, Doug. That's really exciting. It's a lot of money, but we look forward to hearing more about these collaborative awards in the coming months. So I've just been handed this question that's come in through Facebook from Josie Marfleet, and she's asking, will all the research teams have access to one large database? And she's saying that she finds it incredible that some consultants aren't always aware of discoveries made in other countries, even throughout the UK. So what about, how is the Alliance going to change this state of things?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Sharing information is exactly what the Progressive MS Alliance is about, and that's why we are requiring networks to come together. And we're going to be asking these networks to look at things such as drug discovery programs that identify and validate molecular and cellular targets, to look at the advancement of and validation of new or existing biomarkers, imaging biomarkers, again, to better understand what's going on in progressive MS, and to look at new trials or trial designs in remyelination and neuroprotection and other areas to bring clinical trials and new interventions to progressive MS in the next couple of years. And so within these networks, people are going to be sharing data on a very large scale, and that's exactly the goal of the Progressive MS Alliance.
Great.
Can I make a comment generally about sharing research? I think this is a question, you know, when Sarah and I, we will go and give talks around the country, and then people ask, well, how do we know that everybody knows what everybody else is doing, and how do we know it's not being duplicated? And this is a really important question. And so for people to are aware, when researchers carry out research, they are encouraged to publish their data in scientific journals, and all researchers it's their responsibility to kind of look through the journals, what's the latest things that have been published relating to their work. So, you know, ideally every scientist wants to do, I guess, a novel piece of work, so they don't necessarily want to be doing the same thing. So there is sharing of data. It isn't a perfect system, and often the articles that are in journals have to be paid for, so it's by far a perfect system, but scientists know the importance of understanding what's going on, and there's also conferences that go on so people can share data. I don't know if Don or Graham, the postdoc, wants to comment on trying to keep up to date on the field.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So we have, I mean, speaking personally, I mean, I have a lot of access to journals through the university I work in, Edinburgh University, and it is very important, as you say, to make sure you keep up to date with as many of these projects and new findings as possible. And because obviously we're involved in this alliance and progressive MS, that's clearly what we focus on. So there are a lot of papers and a lot of journals out there, and it is important to focus on your area and make sure you're up to date with those things.
Great, thanks very much, Graham. It's good to hear it from a real researcher out there. And on that vein, I want to kind of move us on to actually get to speak to the researchers that have been funded by the Alliance to tell us about their projects. So first of all, I think we'll go back to Don and Graham. We'd love to hear a bit more about your project. So I understand it's involving something called mitochondria. Don and Graham, could you tell us a bit more about it?
Sure, Sarah. So Graham and I have been working over the last 10 years on these things called mitochondria. They're basically the tiny powerhouses in all cells, and they produce the energy that's necessary for the cell to kind of maintain its structure and function. And essentially what we've done is to look at tissue from MS patients, at autopsy or postmortem tissue, and trying to see how energy, both energy use and energy production, might be altered by the multiple sclerosis process. So, you know, loss of myelin, inflammation, damage to the nerves. How does this actually alter the energy status within the central nervous system? And I think Graham will just give you a little bit more kind of detail about the key findings that we've made over the last kind of decade, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we've been focusing on is a thing called mitochondrial DNA. So this is DNA that's actually housed within the mitochondria, and it's very unique to mitochondria, being the only other type of DNA within the cell other than the nuclear DNA we all know. So what we've done in the past is actually take post-mortem tissue from MS patients, and it's important to note that this is progressive patients. And what we've done is actually look at mitochondrial DNA. And we found that it is quite susceptible to inflammation, which we know is obviously very apt for MS patients. So what we've seen is an increase of these mitochondrial DNA defects in MS. And our thinking here is that, I mean, we actually believe that this does have an effect on the stages between relapsing, remitting, and interprogressive MS. And what we're doing now is trying to look at the mechanisms and try and find targets, perhaps, for therapy, and that's really important for us to do.
So I guess the project that was.
Thanks. I'll let you carry on, Don.
I'm sorry. The project that was funded by the Progressive MS Alliance, specifically to look at the susceptibility of individuals with MS to develop this type of mitochondrial DNA injury.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, Don. What does this really mean for people affected by MS? What could this mean to them?
Yeah. So I think the progressive aspect of MS is variable, right? Like we discussed before. There's so many different factors that differ between patients. So to individualize treatment, we need to kind of better understand what's driving the worsening of the neurological function. So our hope is by looking at susceptibility to mitochondrial injury, and in one case it's the mitochondrial DNA, but there are many other examples that we might be able to determine a person's vulnerability of the nerve cells to actually survive in this kind of environment that it faces itself in MS, which is damage to myelin and inflammation. So essentially what we're hoping is that we'll be able to determine the vulnerability of an individual using a test.
Okay, that sounds really, really fascinating. Thank you. And I was just sort of asking more practically, has your project started and how's it going so far?
Yeah, so we really kind of started it during the application process to develop preliminary data. And I would say we're making good progress in terms of doing it. Undoubtedly there's going to be issues that we would have to kind of, resolve. But we hope to kind of come up with something in 12 months' time.
12 months?
12 months, yeah.
Oh, wow.
We can hold them to that.
Okay, watch this space. We'll do a hangout in another 12 months.
Yeah, something. I don't know what that something would mean, but obviously...
Yeah, you can't row back now.
Okay, thank you so much, Don and Graham. I'm going to move us on, and we're going to come back to have some questions for both of the researchers. But I wanted to move us on to talk to another researcher funded by the Alliance, which is Professor Sandra Amor, who's joining us all the way from Amsterdam today. So, hi Sandra, it's really great to have you with us.
Yeah.
Hello. Yes, we can hear you perfectly, yeah. So we'd love to hear a bit about your project and what you're investigating as part of your Alliance funding.
Okay, well, as most people know, with people that develop a progressive MS, they tend to be a bit older. So generally, when you when people develop relapsing remitting MS, they tend to be younger. So my project is going to focus on the impact of aging. I mean, everybody gets old; they get grey hair and they get wrinkles and things. Well, cells in the brain also age, and the project is going to allow me to look at a specific type of cells called the microglia. Now, for those people that are old enough that remember the computer games called Pac-Man, these eating up things, well, microglia or macrophages are a bit like, let's say the brain's Pac-Man. And when they're younger, they can eat up they eat up dying cells and bacteria and viruses. And what I'm going to look at is when they get older, is do their functions change as a factor of age? And is this why people with that develop progressive MS, who tend to be older, is it because their microglia or their Pac-Man in their brain are not working properly?
Excellent, Sandra. That was such a good description. I think that really brought the science to life for us. But I was just going to ask, why do you think that age does seem to be important in MS?
Oh, goodness, yeah, well, that's what I'm going to try and find out, really. You can come back to me in a year's time as well and ask me.
Great. So schedule it in.
Get together.
Okay, we'll come back to you. Do you feel like you want to give us a bit of an insight?
Oh well, okay. I want to tell you something about the preliminary studies that we've done. And
oh yes, please.
We have an animal model of multiple sclerosis, and if we leave them long enough, then the animals develop a progressive disease. And what we've done to look at the impact of age is usually we immunize or use younger mice for these studies, and my preliminary studies showed that if we use older mice, and the older mice get more progressive disease compared to the younger ones, and if as with younger people with MS as well, they don't tend to develop progressive disease. So what I'm hoping to do from the project is to sort of discover a rejuvenation factor. Why don't these cells react in the same way when they're younger, in younger people? Why do they, let's say, maybe dysfunction in older people? So I'm hoping to discover like a rejuvenation factor so that we can rejuvenate the cells in the brain.
So we want to turn back time.
Turn back time, yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Okay, excellent. And in a similar way to what we were asking Don, sounds like you've got underway already. And how long is your project running for?
Well, actually, those preliminary data, like Don said, you develop the preliminary data before you apply for the project. So we developed this, well, we got the preliminary data in the last, let's say, few years, but the project funded by the Progressive Alliance has actually only started this week. So the person that started on the project only started actually with me on Monday.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sandra. So we've got a few questions for both of the, well, all three of you guys joining us in the Hangout today, the researchers. So I just want to sort of open the floor up a bit. So if you've got any other questions for the researchers on Twitter, you can tweet us using the hashtag #BrighterFuture. And I'll be able to ask those questions right now. But we've already had a couple of questions in. So this one here kind of speaks to what you were saying, Sandra. It's from @PommyKnight on Twitter. And they're saying, will treatments for progressive MS, will they look to kind of roll back the damage that's already been caused and seemingly ingrained? So maybe I could put that one to you, Sandra.
Well, to some extent, I think you can stop. Let's say we might be able to stop the progression. And I'm not really sure whether we can actually turn back time 100%, because obviously if cells, and particularly neurons, these nerve cells in the brain, if they are damaged, we know that the nerve cells cannot really be rejuvenated as such. Once they're gone, they're gone. But it could be that we could use stem cell therapy in the future to replace those cells.
Okay, that sounds really. Thank you, Sandra. So I was just going to ask myself, like, why did you both decide to apply to the Alliance for funding?
Oh.
Don or Sandra, you can fight for the answer.
Okay.
Well, they can both answer.
Can I ask that first?
Yes, please.
I've been working in the MS field for quite a long time now, and we've set up this. I mean, maybe people that are listening in also know the initiative that we've taken to develop what we call Meet the Scientists. Well, Sorrel, you know about this at the MS Life. So we developed this sort of forum for people to find out about our research. And in talking to numerous people with MS over the years, well, it must be like 10 years now, frequently we came up with or we were asked the question, why is there not more studies done for people with progressive MS? That was something that spurred me on to try and look into why we're not doing more for progressive MS. And it's like you were saying earlier, I think most of the drugs were targeting the relapsing remitting, and I think what the general consensus was if we stop the relapsing remitting disease, people will not develop the progressive MS. So I think that was the, well, I hope I can speak for a number of people, why they were looking into the relapsing remitting and not into the progressive. But clearly there is a need.
Yeah, okay, thanks very much, Sandra. And Don, I don't know if you wanted to feed into that, or I've got another even harder question that I might give you, which is, where do you think is the best place in the world to do MS research? Seeing as this is a global alliance.
They're going to say Edinburgh.
I know you're based in Edinburgh.
Yeah, of course I'm going to be biased. But before I get to that, Sorrel, maybe just to follow on from Sandra's. So, I mean, it's very clear, like Sandra said, when you talk to patients who come to the clinic, that this is very much, I mean, the hope being if you can control the relapses and the blood-brain barrier breakdown, that we could take care of the consequences, right? And it turns out, okay, that might be one of the ways for some individuals, but it's not going to work always. I mean, the other very exciting thing about the Progressive MS Alliance is the collaborative angle that Doug mentioned. As a clinician and as a scientist, it brings us great pleasure to actually work together with people and share things. I mean, there's always competition, there's always the need to kind of get the best paper first, but there's no reason a collaborative can't get the best paper, right? So instead of just me and Graham trying to get the best paper, the MS Alliance is trying to put together a number of people to really, get the best paper as a collaborative thing. And that really excites me, because that means you can bring in individuals who've been working, with their own bodies in their own field, but not necessarily think about progressive MS, which to me has some unique aspects compared with, some of the things that we consider as neurodegenerative, like Parkinson's or ALS or Alzheimer's disease. So that's the hugely exciting aspect. I'm sure not just for me, but for many other scientists to get involved with the Progressive MS Alliance. And another point I would say is, if you wind back the clock in MS about 20, 25 years, and I'm sure Doug will back me up on this, is, there was a huge expansion when the drugs like the interferons came into the market for relapsing MS. And that meant, research and clinicians and scientists, a whole lot of scientists who got into this field. And this has been about 25 years. And obviously, we have a fixed lifespan, right? So there's a degree of kind of passing on the baton, if you like, to the next generation. So to get involved, when these guys got involved 25 years ago, that was something new that they did. Whereas for us, there's all these experienced experts who can kind of pass down their pearls of wisdom. So we could kind of minimize going down blind passageways, if you like. So when you put the collaborative aspect, there's kind of the guidance and the pearls of wisdom that we could benefit from. As a youngish kind of a scientist, I think it's a very exciting thing to get involved. So the second question was, where's the best person to do it? I think anywhere in the world that's got a supportive environment. If you're the right person and you're in the right place and you've got the right project, I think that's the most exciting thing. And the Alliance is just going to...
That's very pragmatic, Don.
Well, the beauty is the Alliance is going to tear away all, most of the barriers that exist, between these silos. And that means we could just like what we're doing, from different countries coming together, that we could really work together over a period of 4 years, which is very exciting.
Oh, thank you so much, Don. That sounds really, really inspiring. It's great to hear all the enthusiasm about the Alliance. So at this point, I want to come to Tim. I think you've got some questions about the Alliance that you wanted to ask to Sandra and Don. Can I hand over to you, Tim?
Yes, I think some of my questions have been answered, but how is research, how does it differ around the world, and how do people set with priorities of research around the world?
So Sandra or Don, I don't know which one of you would like to have a go at that one.
Well, can I answer that from my point of view?
Yeah.
I've worked in the UK for a long time, as I said before, and also now, well, I'm working in the Netherlands. And from my point of view, research isn't that much different in the world. Like Don was saying, or we were saying before, we all get together at these annual meetings and we share our experiences, and then we sort of meet people. Whichever country it's in, we meet people that have the expertise that may help us with our project, and by collaboration, that really pushes the project along. You can't do anything on your own. I mean, I'm not working on my own on this project. I'm working with people in the UK and also other people in the Netherlands. So from my point of view, at least between England and the Netherlands, and looking at people across the world, I don't think research changes that much. It's not that different. I think people have different expertise, and maybe the people on, let's say, the grant awarding bodies that give you the grants have different experiences or different backgrounds, and maybe they influence which projects are funded. But in general, I wouldn't say that there's a difference between between researchers in different parts of the world. No. I mean, Don, maybe you can add to it.
Tim, did you have any other questions?
Yeah, how many more countries do you expect to join the Alliance? With prevalence of MS being further north, are the Scandinavian countries, I heard Denmark, but are there more Scandinavian countries joining and other countries joining?
So
I'll give that on to Doug.
Yeah, so we're having these conversations sort of as we speak, and the possibilities of membership exist for other countries joining, and again, we're just having these ongoing conversations. I would expect more countries to join, possibly some Scandinavian countries up north, and we look forward to having countries from around the world, countries in the Pan-Asian zones, countries from around Europe, you never know, and we're open to it. And that's exactly what we want. And this momentum has been terrific so far.
Yeah, that's really, really good news. Tim, has that answered all of your questions?
Yeah, except for how do people get involved with research projects? How do they find out about them?
Do you want me to answer that?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there are lots of things that people with MS can do. So, for example, somebody could get involved in a clinical trial or in a research study. And if somebody wanted to get involved in a clinical trial, it's always best to talk to a healthcare professional, your family, about what would be involved in that trial. There's a really good website, clinicaltrials.gov, that's got all the international clinical trials listed there and contact information. In the UK, there's a really new, useful website called UK Clinical Trials Gateway that lists all the clinical trials going on in the UK with a nice, handy, interactive map. But there are also research studies, psychological therapies people could get involved in trials for. We've got a really good page on our website, Being a Study, which lists those. There's also other things to do. For example, people could join the UK MS Register and contribute every 3 months information about how MS affects their lives and contribute to the movement of collecting long-term data. There's also a tissue bank, so if people wanted to do something quite special and donate their tissue after their death. It's quite a personal thing to do, but that's something that a lot of people feel quite passionate about, giving something back. So there's lots of options and there's lots of information on our website.
Great. Sorry, Tim, I'll come back to you. Oh, sorry, was that Doug?
Yeah, Doug here.
Sorry,
and I just want to say that the United States has similar sites.
Okay.
First, I would encourage people to go to the nationalmssociety.org for information. But the U.S. government also has a site, clinicaltrials.gov, that lists clinical trials that people can get involved in as well.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Doug. I'm going to move us on. And I just wanted to say, finally, sort of to wrap up the section about the Alliance, I think we've really heard a lot about, this research is really happening on a global scale, and it's great to hear that there is so much sort of momentum and enthusiasm around the world for progressive MS research. But back in the UK, I think that the MS Society in the UK, we really want to continue, and if anything, we want to raise our investment in progressive MS research. And so that's why we're focusing the Christmas fundraising appeal on the Progressive MS Alliance. So the appeal is called Brighter Future, and you can donate to our appeal today if you just text the word future to 70800, and that will donate £5 to the appeal. You can also visit the website online, which is mssociety.org.uk/future. So I think that wraps up our section on the Alliance, and we've got just to finish up, we've kind of got a bit more of a kind of free-for-all of questions, just a bit more loosely about progressive MS research and things that we've had in over Twitter throughout the course of the question and answer today. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to go to a question I think we've had in that's really, really interesting. Just to remind you all, if you want to send us some last questions in the last sort of 5-10 minutes, you can do that by tweeting using the hashtag BrighterFuture, or you can put a comment below the video. So this question is coming from Angel JA on Google+, but she's asking that she said that she was diagnosed with MS at age 15, but she wants to know if she's able to live her life as a normal person to start with, but also particularly if she gets married, will her kids get MS? I don't know if that's one that you'd like to answer, Emma.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, it's sometimes difficult for clinicians, and I'm sure Don would back me up here, that it's difficult to always predict how people's MS are going to affect their lives. I mean, I think generally speaking, there's a lot that can be done as it stands, and there's a lot of things people can do to improve quality of life, as well as managing relapses if people are having them, and symptom management. So I think we should all be quite positive, and I think it's really good for people to try and get a lot of information about possible treatments out there, and there's lots of support and services they can have access to. So the MS Society website and the National MS Society website, all the worldwide websites have really good information on things they can do that. And in terms of
the inheritance,
I think that's a really, really good question, and that's something that people worry about a lot, understandably. And MS isn't considered a hereditary condition, so that means if you have like cystic fibrosis, for example, if you get the gene for that, you will develop MS. MS isn't the same. So people feel that, if their mum had MS, that it must be passed on by a gene, but that's not always the case. So genes are a really, really important part of risk of developing MS. And actually, they did some studies looking at identical twins, and if an identical twin, if two twins had MS, the risk of the other twin who have exactly the same DNA getting MS is 30%. So genes only make up 30% of somebody's risk. So we've actually moved quite a lot forward in this kind of research, and we know there are over 100 genes now linked to increasing someone's susceptibility to MS. But there are other factors that need to happen as well. There's environmental risk factors, potentially vitamin D deficiency, viruses that are linked. So it's the answer is we don't really know, but the chances are if someone has MS, the chances are their child won't develop MS. It's a 2% chance. I don't know if Don wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, sure, Emma. So definitely, I mean, the advice is just to go ahead with your family planning aspects. That's what we say to patients in the clinics, and more or less really ignore the risk, because the risk is so small. You know, it's about 1 in 50. I guess it's always difficult to interpret. How do you interpret a 1 in 50 risk? Maybe one way is to say, you know, you've got to have kind of 50 kids for one to get MS, right? So it might be your first one, it might be your 50th one. So it's that low. And in terms of carrying on life, I mean, again, what we say to patients is just to live as normal a life as possible. I mean, there's a couple of things that you can do to make MS worse, things like smoking. So we know if you smoke, particularly progressive MS, that can make the progression slightly worse. So you know, having just a normal balanced diet, you know, recommended amount of exercise, and avoid smoking, and these are the kind of things. So as clinicians, what we want to do, particularly in the early stages, is to just live as normal a life as possible. And if you exercise a lot, it doesn't mean that you're going to do any damage to your nervous system. And one day we hope to say the same thing to patients with progressive MS.
Okay, thanks very much, Don. I think that's quite a sort of a reassuring answer. So I was just going to come to our panel. Do any of our panel of people affected by MS, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask at this point?
I have one question. It's
okay,
around...
Rani, sure.
I have one question. It's around the Alliance. Will the Alliance, alongside other MS research medical professions, set an international standard for the various MS progression stages? Because, you know, in terms of knowing when you move from relapsing remitting to SPMS, primary progressive MS, because obviously with that comes an ability to have a clearer treatment approach to your patients. So to open it up to
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, Rani. I don't know who fancies having a go at that one.
What I could do is confirm that the Alliance is interested in understanding how the disease progresses. And so as we gain a better understanding, the Alliance will be able to, or might be able to, make more definitive statements. But as I mentioned, so we're interested in funding research on biomarkers, better understanding the natural progression of progressive MS. And so hopefully over time we will be able, there will be stages, there will be more predictive markers of MS, and so that's exactly the goal of the Alliance.
Okay, thanks very much, Doug.
Can I ask Don a question? So Don, is it possible that one day we won't be looking at relapses as a way of measuring MS progression? We'll be looking at other markers, perhaps changes in mitochondria, I think MRI scans. Is that the way things could move forward?
For sure. I mean, I think it would be a combination, right, Emma? Okay. So the inflammation aspect, the relapses, that's clearly very, very important. And then you have the second aspect, which is the myelin repair, so remyelination therapy to kind of restore that aspect. And then the third key aspect is where some of the research that we and others have been doing comes in, is to target the neuron, if you like, protect the neurons and make it work better. So one could kind of imagine a situation where it isn't just one drug an MS patient would be recommended. It will be kind of 2 or 3 to address these different components.
Cool, thank you, Don.
Thank you.
I think at this point we've had loads of questions in about stem cells, and I'm not going to be able to ask all of them, unfortunately, but I want to just ask a few and see if we can sort of have a bit of input about that. So first of all, Fiona Harvey has sent a question in on Facebook, which is saying, why is it taking so long to roll out stem cell research, so to kind of turn the research into treatments? But we've also had questions in from Karen Hanford, who says, are stem cells the way forwards? And somebody on Facebook, Costa Andrew, who's also said, I have secondary progressive MS. Should I go abroad and invest in a stem cell treatment? Emma, I don't know if that's something that you'd like to answer.
Well, I mean,
there's a lot to cover there, sorry.
Yeah, and I might ask Don to input as well. So stem cells are something, understandably, that are of great fascination to people with MS and MS researchers. Potentially, you know, they could be used to repair or replace lost or damaged tissue in MS. So they obviously, the idea of being able to replace a cell that we've lost has huge potential. In terms of being able to do that, as things stand, we're not close to being able to replace lost nerve cells. But what some of the stem cell research at the moment is looking at ways that it could either affect the immune system or help stimulate myelin repair. So there are a couple of different types of stem cells that are being tested in MS at the moment. There's one called mesenchymal stem cells, which they come from the bone marrow. I think often you can take it from your hip. And these are looking at the ways that they can affect the environment the cells in, and perhaps affect the immune system, help myelin repair. And there's also hematopoietic stem cells as well, which are stem cells that can basically produce all the cells of the immune system. And could we essentially replace our immune system, and so it doesn't act in a way that it had done previously? So these are really, really interesting pieces of research, but they're still in clinical trial. So until they've been through clinical trial, shown that they're both safe and effective, they work there, and they've then licensed for people with MS, that people won't be able to access them unless they do it via a clinical trial. So in terms of, I think, the question about people going abroad to have stem cell treatment, I mean, how someone decides to seek treatment is absolutely a personal decision, but it's something that should always, I think, be discussed with a neurologist or a healthcare professional, because there will be risks of going abroad. You might not know what the clinic is like, how safe it is, how it's regulated. So there can be a lot of, I guess, physical risks to doing that. And as it stands, there are no licensed therapies, stem cell therapies for MS anywhere in the world, so it's still very much an experimental treatment, and it should be considered in that context. But I think in our website we have lots of information about stem cells, so you can always have a look there. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that.
Okay, I think you've covered that really well, actually. And kind of staying on the stem cell theme, we've had a couple of questions in on Facebook. First of all, from Julie Lloyd and also Christopher Paul Gill, who are both asking about this thing that's been in the news recently about people researchers taking nasal stem cells from the nasal cavity and transplanting them into the spinal cord, and kind of helping someone that had a spinal cord injury. And they're asking if that has any possibility to sort of be translated into MS. Could that mean anything for people with MS, the same type of treatment? I'm going to give that on to you again, Emma. Does
anybody else want to answer it? I'm happy to answer it. No, silence. Okay. So I think the research that everyone's been referring to is looking at olfactory and sheathing cells. So they're stem cells that line the nasal cavity, and they can constantly regenerate and regrow. And the researchers, what they did was they looked at somebody who had a spinal cord injury. So at one point along the spinal cord there was a section that was completely severed, and then they transplanted these olfactory sheathing cells in the injury site to see if they could regrow the nerve fibers and connect messages again. And it's fascinating that they were able to have some progress on this. But in terms of MS, I mean, MS is a much more complex condition in terms of where you're looking at damage. So when you're looking at spinal cord injury, you're looking at one area of damage, whereas when you're looking at MS, you're looking at potentially lots of different lesions and lots of different nerve fibers that would need to be repaired. So it's not completely out of the question, but at the moment there'd be a lot more work needed to do to establish what lesions would be important to transplant cells into, how we would deliver those cells, because you're looking at potentially injecting into the brain or the spinal cord? Do you want to put it in the spinal fluid, in the blood? There's lots of things that would need to be considered as to how that was possible. So it's very promising for spinal cord injury, even though it's done in one person, that needs to be replicated. But for MS, I think we're a bit more behind on that. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything.
I think that was great, Emma, thank you. And actually, I think it's worth saying that we're working on our stem cell page for the MS Society website at the moment. We're having a dedicated page about stem cell research that will have a lot of really up-to-date information. So over the next couple of months, you'll be able to check out all the latest research there. So sadly, I think we've got to wind up the Hangout. We're kind of running out of time. But does anybody else on our panel have any other questions that they'd like to ask before we close? Maybe we've covered everything. Okay, so I just want to say thank you so much to all of our participants. I think you've been excellent, our experts that have been answering the questions, and also our panel that have been asking them. And we've had loads of questions in on Twitter and on Facebook, and I'm really sorry that we haven't quite had time to answer all of them. But what you can do is that if you've got any questions that you feel like we haven't really had the time to cover, or if you've got any burning questions as a result of today, we'd love it if you want to, you can email those to helpline@mssociety.org.uk, and then someone in the research team will be able to get back to you sort of as soon as we can.
We might have a backlog, so
yeah, maybe that's true. But just a final reminder that if you do want to donate to our Christmas Brighter Future appeal, then you can do that. So you can do it by donating online. You can online if you visit mssociety.org.uk/future. That's our donate page, or you can text future to 70800, and that will send a donation of £5. So if you want to find out more about any of the things we've been talking about today, there should be some links below, kind of to things on the MS. Oh yeah, or on the right-hand side of the page. It depends if you're watching on Google Plus or on YouTube. But that should take you to some more resources on the MS Society website or the Progressive MS Alliance website. So I just want to say thank you all again for watching, and if all our participants want to say goodbye and we can all talk at the same time. So bye, thank you so much for joining us.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you, bye-bye. I'm going to stop.